I welcome you for this afternoon session. Today we have, in the afternoon session, we have two talks. The first one is by Professor Apurva D. Patel from ISC Bangalore. Dr. Apurva Patel is a professor at the Center for High Energy Physics and Supercomputer Education and Research Center, Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. He obtained his master's degree in physics from Indian Institute of Technology, Mumbai, and PhD in theoretical high energy physics from Caltech, Pasadena, USA in 1984. He has been a postdoctoral research fellow at UCST, Lavala, USA, and University of Wuppertal, Germany, and a scientific associate at Theory Division CERN, Geneva, Switzerland from 1987 to 89. He is a faculty member at the Indian Institute of Science since 1989. His research interests are in the lattice gas theories, quantum computation, genetic information, and black hole thermodynamics. He is a great friend of this university. He has visited a couple of times earlier, once for SQUAN 2007 and the second time for QUANSUS 2008. This is his third visit to this university, and we welcome Professor Patel and request him to deliver his talk on quantum aspects of biological processes.
I'm going to talk about molecular biology using the language of computer science. And I'm a physicist, so I'm expert in neither of those two things, but I have found enough things to wonder about, and I hope I will provoke your interest in the kind of things that I'm going to describe. So this is the abstract which is printed in the book, and the focus is on looking at molecular biology as a nanotechnology. It works. It has worked for billions of years and in an amazing variety of circumstances. Not only that, Darwinian evolution has taken its basic processes to their highly optimized and essentially universal forms. And if one looks at them as certain tasks carried out by certain algorithms, one can wonder about what is being optimized and how. What I am going to talk about is there are powerful signatures of quantum effects and wave dynamics in these processes. I will consider the particular examples of enzyme catalysis, photosynthesis, and genetic languages. The experimental work which demonstrates these features is not my own, so I will be happy to discuss with those interested and give references, but I have tried to reformulate the results in a language which I feel comfortable with. So to develop that language, I have to give a broad description of computation and try to connect what we think with the particular processes. So, physical process, we are quite accustomed to looking at them as some kind of initial state, evolving by certain physical interactions to some final state. And what we expect a computer to do is not very different. It takes certain input, processes that input according to some specific interactions, and produces an output. So, can any physics be called? Well, not necessarily. say the molecules of air in this room, there are lots of collisions and interactions going on and something getting converted to other, but we call it or any other kind of computation. The reason is that I have to add a few adjectives to computation, that it does the processing, but the processing is done according to a specific purpose, and what is being processed has some meaning. Okay. Kind of colloquial terms, they suffice to describe what is going on, and the meaning which is inherent in this computation, it arises from mapping particular physical properties to some mathematical terminology. The properties we'll call hardware and mathematical part we'll call software, and once this kind of mapping has been put on top of a physical process, we can call it a computation, and we can see that what processing is now becomes an algorithm. It carries out certain tasks. If we have a particular purpose, then we can see how efficiently or inefficiently that is implemented. And that gives us a very wide framework to define many types of computers. They depend on what kind of physical interactions we decide to incorporate in the hardware and what mathematical mapping we construct between that hardware and our equations or terminology or what we call the software. So in this general framework, let me define some categories of computers. No doubt what a computer does in terms of both its efficiency as well as stability will depend very crucially on the physical interactions that are built in. And different physical interactions will produce different type of computers. The computers which we are most familiar with, particularly the silicon chip based digital machines, they can be called classical computers based on Boolean logic, and in physics terminology I can label them as particle dynamics. They are implemented using digital circuits and very discrete variables changing from one state to another. But we cannot stop at that. We can ask different realizations, and much of the focus of this meeting is on quantum computation, which incorporates both particle and wave dynamics, and the process mathematically is described using a unitary evolution of some quantum states in a Hilbert space. But looking at it this way, one can ask third question, that what about having something which is just wave dynamics and not particles? What kind of computers will that produce? Well, certainly that dynamics exists. Classical waves are all over the place. We use sound, light, and well, all kind of periodic oscillatory motions. They have the property that they are analog variables, and they can superpose, interfere, disperse, etc. But on the other hand, they are classical, so there won't be any of the entanglement stuff part of it. But if we build a system which is based on this, can it do something different than the particle dynamics? The answer is yes, it actually can do different things. They have not been exploited mostly for historical reasons. Nobody has paid too much attention to what they can do. But waves actually have been heavily used in communications. As a matter of fact, most of our modern communication is based on electromagnetic waves. So they are not some unknown entities. but we have not constructed some analog of Boolean logic based on some dynamics, not just mere transmission, which is involved in communications. And where can such things be useful? I'm going to describe situations where this wave dynamics can be useful, and those situations include problems where oracles are expensive, spatial resources are cheap, the problem size, which corresponds to the number of required wave modes, is not too large, it's modest, and quantum algorithms are fragile. So it turns out that there is a certain region between the particle dynamics and quantum algorithms where wave algorithms can actually do a better job than Boolean logic. Quantum thing is too unstable, and wave properties are long-lived enough so you can do various things. And the typical example which has become well known in this context is the problem of database search. In Boolean logic, database is typically first sorted and then searched using a binary tree. That's what our computers do. Well, Google does it all the time. And that is the kind of most efficient classical algorithm, though it requires a lot of effort to sort out the huge list. If the database is unsorted, then the classical algorithm is no better than just random lookup, and one can inspect one item after another, and the problem is order n in terms of complexity. What wave or quantum dynamics allows to do is one can work with amplitudes and not probabilities. That allows the possibility of superposing multiple amplitudes and then using constructive as well as destructive interference to transfer the amplitude from one state to another. And the solutions which come out of these processes actually are different than the classical ones. The most famous example is Grover's algorithm, which can search an unsorted database of n items using order square root of n binary questions. And it's a very important algorithm because it has been proved that this is actually the optimal algorithm. You can't do anything better. Let me illustrate it in terms of a very simple picture, what this algorithm does, and I have taken the example of selecting 4 items, selecting 1 item out of 4 in a database. The first stage represents an unbiased initial state. All of them have equal amplitude or equal probability. You can call it a uniform distribution, and many physical configurations. This will correspond to a sort of equilibrium stage. Then you implement the first instruction, which is called an oracle. It is a binary question with only 2 answers, yes or no. In quantum or wave dynamics, what this oracle does is basically flips the sign of the target amplitude, so it takes this uniform superposition state to something where whatever the desired state may be. In this particular picture, it's the first one, gets flipped in sign, and this physically can be implemented as a sudden perturbation of the initial state according to some criterion. And what does the algorithm do after this particular oracle? Hardly anything, it just waits in terms of time. And if there is a mechanism for oscillations built in, it's quite natural that the oscillatory functions will always go plus and minus sides around their mean. And the mean here was a common mean, and the whole thing was equilibrium and stable. Once we did the perturbation, the mean has shifted, the value is now 1/4 in these units. And if you do oscillations about this new mean, after half a cycle it produces a state where the first amplitude is 1 and the other amplitudes have dropped to 0. And that is the state which we are looking for. It is an answer to the oracle question, and at this precise instant, if you want to get hold of the answer, we have to stop the algorithm. In quantum processes, this algorithm is stopped by a measurement process, but there could be other ways of stopping the algorithm. And if we do that, then the 100% amplitude is in the target state, and the job is done. Now, this picture I have described kind of carefully to avoid any complications of details of quantum dynamics. In particular, one can just talk about oscillations of the amplitudes going up and down, and for that reason, this algorithm can be perfectly implemented using coupled oscillators, if you want to do that. And I have an example to show classical oscillators. These are 4 different oscillators connected by a common bar upstairs, which actually couples them, and they undergo a certain kind of motion. So now I will say exactly what is happening. All 4 started together, then one of them was bounced off. That is the second one. And what happens is the one which is reflected, the one underwent arrow curve picks up the amplitude. Where did the amplitude come from? The bouncing off was completely elastic. There is no energy fed in the reflection, but the energy has come from the neighboring oscillators. And if you observe, there are specific positions where the reflected oscillator moves at a high speed, but the other ones are more or less stationary. There is nothing much mysterious about it. Actually, this is what became of my son's high school science project. Now where is my talk gone? Okay. So it's a classical process, coupled oscillator. It's a simple demonstration, as I said, in my high school science project for my son. He could show it in his school. Nothing fancy about it, and it's Grover's algorithm in action. What happens is a little bit change of terminology. In quantum systems, when we talk about amplitudes, the square of the amplitude gives the probability of a state. And we want an algorithm which takes the high probability in some initial state to high probability in some final state. In wave algorithm, we still transfer the amplitude, but the physical meaning of that is completely different. The square of the amplitude now gives energy. And so the problem now does the job of transferring the energy from some particular initial configuration to a different one. Now this is a very powerful concept. You are not transferring probabilities, you are transferring energy, and that has a huge number of practical uses. First of all, the wave systems with coupled modes are kind of ubiquitous. You can make them very easily, from macroscopic systems to even molecular ones. You can demonstrate that the systems are there just by observing the spectra. So if you see a vibrational spectrum, definitely there are oscillators present inside, and those things can now be built inside various devices as some parts, and those things can be mechanical systems, chemical systems, electrical systems, even biological ones. No problem. Energy transfer is a very important phenomena. And as far as biology is concerned, I want to stress that all living organisms are entities which are not in thermal equilibrium. They have to manage energy. As a matter of fact, they perform very efficient free energy processing, what we commonly refer to as eating food, and that is an absolutely essential part for the organism to survive and stay out of equilibrium. When the organism comes into equilibrium with its environment, we call it dead. So it needs energy and it has to process it, and the evolution has brought it to the stage where this processing is very efficient. So the question now is, any of these wave algorithms, have they played any role in this various kind of energy processing involved in living systems? And the signatures I'm going to describe fall into that particular category. But before going to biology, let me just give a general description of what kind of things energy transfer can do. What Grover's algorithm does is actually a job of focusing the energy. Takes a distributed system with many different components, and you perform a specific oracles, and all the energy lands up in a specific oscillator, provided it undergoes a certain number of oracle calls. And processes which are highly sensitive to energy availability can benefit from such a focusing. So here are some easy examples to think of. One of them is a kind of nanomechanical device. I have drawn it in a structure like a comb. Each tooth can be interpreted as some kind of oscillator which vibrates in a certain way, and there will be a signal coming in which can be called a perturbation. The signal can come up, hit a particular tooth, and if the whole thing is tuned properly, it's actually a resonance condition which you have to implement. The one which is perturbed actually picks up the energy from its neighbors and undergoes a change to a resonant oscillation and a large amplitude, and such a thing can be used as a switch or a sensor to be implemented in these nanoscale devices, where you want to find the signal, but you do not necessarily want to individually go and look at every segment, because the individual addressing may be too complicated. If you can find an easy way to address, it can certainly help. Another possibility which is far more dramatic is the process of catalysis. The catalysis is typically understood as a process which has to cross an energy barrier. And typically this barrier suppresses the rates of the reaction by the Boltzmann factor, e raised to minus barrier divided by kT. Now if we find a way to somehow boost this energy, the effect will be exponential. You can provide a few kT of energy, which is order kT energies are there in all the modes all over the place. You put them in a proper location by some clever arrangement, the rates will go up by exponential factors. And that can have a rather drastic consequence, and I will come back to this instance in a little while. What about the opposite? One can also run the Grover's algorithms in reverse. It's a reversible mathematics. Unitary evolution always can go backwards. And if one implements that, it will amount to taking an energy concentrated in one place and rapidly spreading it out. And again, this is the fastest rate of spread you can obtain, because this is the optimal algorithm. And that also can be useful in problems such as shock absorber and vibrational isolation. You want to protect your system against unwanted large perturbations. If it happens by chance, you want to distribute it as fast as possible before damage is caused. Well, you can do that also with the same strategy. And here is a kind of, again, a cooked up model which can do such a job. The four oscillator system which I showed can be connected in hierarchy, and what it will do is when one of them is suddenly perturbed, it will spread it out very rapidly over a large region, and then one can set up a scheme where the whole thing is damped after it gets distributed, and that can help in taking out the shock from the system. So these are very simple-minded pictures of what one can do with wave algorithms viewed as energy transfer processes. And now I can go to discussing the biological examples. So the first example is something which I already mentioned, it's catalytic processes. We do it in industry up to some extent, and the gains which have been achieved by human designs range from factor of 1,000 to 1,000,000. In molecular biology, the gains are much larger, going from 1,000,000 to 1,000,000,000,000. And the energy change which can produce such gains in terms of Boltzmann factor goes up to about 20 kT. So how do these things happen? No doubt they require some kind of cooperative phenomenon. And there is a standard theory in chemistry which tries to describe the dynamics of catalysis. It's a heuristic description because what we experimentally know are actually just the initial and final state, not the intermediate steps. So what the transition state theory says is that there is a huge barrier, no doubt about it, but what the catalysts do is they lower the energy of the barrier. Somehow they modify the internal state, and that can happen because the chemical groups, if you add some things here and there, some parts will attract, some part will repel, and the energy landscape can get modified. No doubt about that. And that all involves polarization of electron clouds. Sometimes the molecules get deformed and there are structural changes, and because of this thing, the barrier height is reduced, and once the barrier height is reduced, the things go over very easily, and that terminology is called transition state theory. Now, based on what I said just a few minutes ago, I can also think of an alternative picture, that what the catalyst can do is not necessarily deform the shapes of the molecule, but it can provide a mechanism to focus the energy of many vibrational modes into the reactor site. And if somehow it manages to do that, that will also help in crossing the energy barrier. And there are vibrating resonant modes in these catalytic structures. Again, there is no doubt about it. So the practical question is, when the reactant come along and from drifting along in the solution and goes and interacts with the particular sites, does that mode pick up the energy from its neighbor and complete the reaction? Now, the practical situation can be more complicated. It can be a combination of the two. And you can lower the barrier as well as concentrate energy, and well, two features are better than one, and the biology won't care about what came from where. But can we think of a signature which distinguishes this part of scenario from this particular scenario? And the answer is yes. The thing which is very easily available and testable is the consequence of isotopic substitution. Now, if you change the isotopes of the atoms involved in the molecules, the nucleus changes, the mass becomes different, but the electronic structure remains unchanged. So if the processes are gaining something from chemical environment by just distorting the electronic clouds, nothing much would be expected from isotopic substitution. But on the other hand, if the vibrational modes are involved with some resonant conditions, they will definitely affected because that vibrational signal comes from the mass of the nucleus, not the electron. And so there will be dependence on this diffusion and tunneling processes as well as resonance condition. They have different dependence on masses. Resonance will produce a sharp peak. Diffusion and tunneling kind of gives a monotonic behavior. The question is whether such thing can be seen. There would be other kind of effects also. The concentration dependence will be different because of having an individual reaction versus a cooperative phenomena. So cooperative phenomena does benefit from larger concentrations. Temperature dependence can be different as well because the vibrational modes have energies which are orders of magnitude different than the energies involved in atomic bonds, and depending on what role is played by what, there could be different signals. So these are the criteria one can think of without too much trouble. What does the experiment say? And the experiments have observed one particular feature in many of these enzymatic reactions, which has been labeled as kinetic isotope effect. It goes back all the way to work of Westheimer, and many times it's called Westheimer effect. It is an example of isotope substitution and its influence on the rate of reaction. And the largest effect is seen when hydrogen is substituted by a deuterium or a tritium, because that is where the isotope substitution produces largest changes in masses in terms of ratios. And the bonds typically are used are the ones with carbon, because carbon is kind of all over the place in all biological molecules. So what is found is there is a large dependence of this kinetic isotopic effect, what is called KIE, in both primary signal as well as secondary signal. And the primary signal is labeled as substitution of the atom, which is directly exchanged between two molecules. And secondary one is not the molecule, not the atom which is exchanged, but a neighboring atom with properties which is similar to the one which is exchanged. And both of these have been observed, and a lot of work is by Kleinman and her group at Berkeley, and they have termed this phenomena as vibrationally enhanced quantum tunneling. They could not keep out the vibrational part from the whole description because of this isotope effect. If it was just pure electron cloud, it would not have shown the dependence on the mass. So vibrations are playing a role, and they have investigated many of these enzymes, alcohol dehydrogenase, lipoxygenase, glucose oxidase, all these fancy names. One has to pick up some biological literature to literally understand what they correspond to, but the signal is there. And so the question is now to understand, well, can we construct a dynamical model based on this principle which gives you efficient role of the vibrational molecules, and it is producing a catalytic process, and the kind of scenario which I described based on Grover's algorithm does fit into that particular signature. Another example is that of photosynthesis. Turns out to be a surprise in the sense the experimentalist discovered something which was not at all expected. Nobody believed that such a thing would survive in biological processes, but we'll quickly see what it is. And what the process is the leaf has to capture sunlight. And then that sunlight has to be directed toward a particular location where all the machinery is there to convert carbon dioxide into glucose. Now that machinery is expensive and it cannot be put all over the place. What is done is that there is a big antenna kind of structure which captures the sunlight and then kind of brings it into the right place. Now, if that has to occur efficiently, well, this diffusion or whatever from the antenna to that center has to be organized in a clever way. And what is known is that this focusing or transport of energy is essentially perfect, 99.9% or something like that. One doesn't have to worry about optimality questions anyway, because if you have reached 100%, there is not much better you can do. So what exactly is going on in this efficient energy transfer? And that problem can be mapped onto what is labeled as a spatial search problem, and compared to a Grover's algorithm, which is an unsorted database, here the geometry and connectivity between various neighbors play a very important role. And the process can be kind of seen as going from one location to its neighbor and from the neighbor to its next neighbor. Same kind of thing what typically talks about in some graph theory or some random walk kind of processes. The point is that when the light is captured at some particular point, it has no idea where the reaction center is. But somehow it has to find its way, and that has to be done cleverly enough. And by the way, none of our human design system have this 99.9 efficiency in terms of capturing sunlight and directing it to a proper location. Our solar cells do a job maybe of the order of 10%. So there is certainly very non-trivial stuff going on.
So is there only one center for leaf or?
No, there are many centers per leaf, but for every center there are a large number of antenna nodes as well. So this is an example which I am going to show, which the experimentalists worked on. It's a complex, light harvesting complex of what are called purple bacteria, very primitive, simple organisms. They have this FMO protein, Phenna-Matthews Olson, people's names attached with it. They act as this light capturing sites, these proteins. And the organization is such that there are 7 of these sites attached to one reaction center. It's a small system. And that site is inside each of these so-called bacteria chlorophyll pigment. There are 7 of these proteins, and next to one of the 7 is the reaction center. And what the group of Fleming et al. At Berkeley observed experimentally is that this energy transport of whatever is captured from the photon shows coherent oscillations, in contrast to classical hopping. Nobody was expecting a coherent phenomena in this process, and they first saw it at liquid nitrogen temperature, 77 degree Kelvin. They thought it would be better to cool it down and observe it, so that's where they looked for it. And they could observe it for 500 femtosecond. And they didn't go beyond because they stopped the experiment at that stage. Even at 500 femtosecond, the thing was still oscillating. And afterwards, they decided, well, we can see what is happening at room temperature also, and they could see the signal at room temperature as well. So this is a observation, and let me show the movie which I got from Fleming. So this is the two-dimensional spectroscopy of this signal which they observed, and the different sites or different frequencies correspond to different locations. This is the time running. And one can clearly see that there is some bumps going up and down. Okay, there is one here, there is one here. This is a major one which is close to the reaction center. But the oscillations are still going on even after 500 seconds, both here as well as here. And at some 600, 700 they stopped. So what is the role of these oscillations? And they tried to make a model which describes the oscillations, which you only gives correlation. So now you can give a site-based mapping of what is happening in terms of energy. So these are the kind of 7 molecules, and the different codes of the color describe things which are moving back and forth. The reaction center is somewhere over here, and what they have modeled is what would happen if the whole thing was incoherent. That is just a probabilistic description. And what will happen if the dynamics is coherent. So let me play it again. When it is incoherent, you hardly see any signal at all. It just finishes in 10 femtosecond or something of that particular scale. It's just a little bit change initially occurring over here, and you don't see anything happening at all. And this is the situation where the coherent oscillations are going on even after several hundred femtoseconds. And these are the 7 molecules. They are connected in some particular way. They transfer the energy kind of from one location to another. So let me give some description of what the structure looks like. These molecules, as shown in the picture, they are arranged in some 3-dimensional structure. It obviously has to avoid shadows because it's trying to capture lights, and the reaction center is near one of them. The energy which is captured in a states which they are called excitons. And it's a little unusual. These excitons are not atomic states, which is what we would thought about in conventional quantum mechanics. Some ground state, it goes up. But these are actually highly distributed states of these molecules. In particularly, many of them can be seen as, there are 7 molecules. You can think of bonds between these molecules. And many of the excitations live not on a single molecule, but on 2 molecules simultaneously. Some 2 neighboring molecules. One can think of that it is sitting on the molecular bond. And that is very unusual because the molecules are nanometers apart. Atoms will be angstrom, but these are 10 times larger distances. And the electronic states are sitting over that big distance, and they are oscillating in terms of this coherent dynamics. What seems to be also true that the dynamics is optimized for energy transfer and not necessary for the quickest step which would take you there. That is quite obvious because one sees many oscillations. If it was just a one-step process, as soon as it's reached there for the first oscillation, it would have been used up and finished. It doesn't necessarily happen that, but what the biology seems to be interested in is that nothing should get lost. Whatever is captured, even if it takes many trials, must remain there and efficiently be used. And the criterion for optimization in this can be different. It's not necessarily the fastest algorithm, which what one wants to implement on a computer is the best deal. It can be looked at as a bond-based random walk, not a site-based one, because the states are kind of distributed. It's also true that all the bond energy are not necessarily equal, but things are still going back and forth, and damping or decoherence is also visible. The initial amplitude is large and it is slowly dying, but while it is going back and forth, so even the decoherence may have a role to play in the whole dynamics. It should not be ignored. And classical picture doesn't fit, but I would say what it is. It's kind of written all over the textbooks in any of these processes. They describe the whole process as an energy funnel. So there's a large area, but it's a sloping kind of inward, so it falls here, it just goes down there. And certainly that will do the job. There is nothing wrong in terms of design, but it costs a lot. Because if you want to produce an energy funnel, you have to produce permanent energy gradients. And to keep that in place, a lot of energy has to be spent to have a gradient and to see that in the liquid environment where things are running around, the gradients don't get wiped out. It's just like taking a load on our head and standing in one place. Well, we may not be doing any work in terms of physics, but you do get tired. So energy gradients can do the job, but they are expensive. And what the wave dynamics actually does is the same task, but things are running back and forth both ways. There are no gradients, but there is an efficient process. And what exactly is going on? Well, something interesting should be modeled to take into account this particular feature. One thing important in the model is to keep in the back of our head, the geometry is not a simplistic one, which again will be suggested by classical arguments that it should be a star graph or a ring graph. Those things don't seem to be the structural features involved in this particular process. It has nearest neighbor couplings, most likely seen in terms of random walk kind of processes. And so the goal is, can we construct a realistic algorithm? These are the ingredients. It's the inverse problem. We know energy transfer can take place by waves, and can we now develop an algorithm which will do this step by step? Okay. Third example. It's of genetic languages. In some sense, it is closer to our arithmetic than the previous ones, which are more of mechanical or chemical systems. This is directly number theory. And what this machinery does is very simple. Most of the time, it makes copies of itself. And it makes that copy by picking up components from an unsorted database. There is always a master which tells you that I have to make this. All the ingredients are here. It takes up piece by piece, sticks them in the correct location, and then you have a complement, and that complement now can be separated and it will do the job for the next stage. And that's the only thing the genes do. When they came from our parents and they will go to our children, they're sitting there most of the time. You make copies of it as many times as you want, but this is their basic job. What is the optimal way to do it? Well, there is an unsorted database involved, and you are picking up objects one by one, which is a binary oracle. Either the picked up object is right or wrong. There is no third possibility. If it is right, you will put it in the correct place. If it is wrong, you will throw it back and wait for another molecule to come along. So unsorted database with a binary oracle, we already know the best algorithm given by Love-Grover. As I said earlier, it can be described completely in the language of wave dynamics if you want. If you want to develop a machinery in a quantum description, that is also okay. The algorithm doesn't care. It's a mathematical to physics mapping which can use different languages. But what is the signature of this algorithm? It tells a specific relation between the number of oracle calls which you have to make and the number of items which you can distinguish. And that relation is given by this formula, 2q plus 1 sine inverse 1 by root 1 is equal to pi by 2. And the smallest solution is what I illustrated by that simple example at the beginning. With one oracle, you can distinguish 4 objects. So that is the exact solution of this equation. But one can ask, well, what if you go further? If you have 2 oracles, you can distinguish 10 objects. Well, the numbers are fractional over here, which means there will be a small amount of error. And in this case, you can work out the error. The error is like 1 part in 1,000. Doesn't matter much. If you have 3 oracles, you can distinguish 20 objects. And if you know a little bit of biology, these numbers will immediately strike you as very fundamental units involved in the genetic alphabet. There is a alphabet of DNA made up of 4 nucleotide bases, which are distinguished by 1 base pairing. The base pairing plays the role of oracles, and there are 20 amino acids which make up the alphabet of proteins, which are distinguished by a triplet genetic code. And one can look harder enough to find an analog of this as well. So these numbers are there mysteriously in the basic building blocks of these languages. The question is, did this algorithm had any role to play in selecting this alphabet? So one can ask whether the machinery has ingredient to implement this particular algorithm. It's not very difficult to cook up some scenarios where it can be done, and I have done that. I'm not going to discuss those scenarios today. But it means that if we have to design a system to implement this task of the genes, knowing all the physical laws that we do, we would opt for something like what is present in nature. And nature also gives a critical input that if you want to wonder about what happened at the original of life, the easiest situation would be for the nature to have picked up the binary code, what is there in Boolean logic. Because it can certainly do everything. It can form the complementary pair. And it would be a simpler system. It requires only 2 molecules. So if you're starting from scratch, getting to 2 is obviously the simplest thing to do. So it would have preceded whatever we see today. So what we see today is a complication. But did nature undergo this complication because of the advantage provided by the wave algorithm? That's an important question. Certainly the classical Boolean logic is bypassed. If you go, it was simpler. So what did nature do? Unfortunately, we can't answer that because what happened in evolution billions of years ago, we have no idea of knowing it and we can't repeat it. We repeat something else. All we can address is, does this algorithm play a role today in our own bodies? And if that is so, we can design experiments to test for it. So the challenge is to construct a believable as well as testable model implementing this Grover's algorithm, quantum dynamics, wave dynamics, whatever you want to stick it inside, and the molecular ingredients which we already know very well. And if we can do any one of these things, we'll certainly have a powerful reason to say that we are not the first ones to think about quantum computation. Some primitive bacteria fooling around billions of years ago already figured out how best to use nature's ingredients for the job that are necessary for the purpose of life. That's all I have to say today. Thank you.
Now it's open for questions, please. Yeah.
When you were talking about coupled oscillators, it kind of reminded me of the FPU problem where they were asking the opposite question of when will, given an energy in one mode, when will it spread out ergodically throughout all the other modes? And then they put in a little bit of nonlinear coupling and they found that actually the energy was not spreading all over the place. Now you said that, so one of my questions is whether you have, do you have in mind any specific types of oscillators, especially linear versus nonlinear, or linear is enough in your?
Linear is enough. As a matter of fact, you can do everything with harmonic oscillators, in which case you can actually have an exact mathematical solution.
Right. So in this case,
you can do numerical stuff as well.
Sure. In this case, you're not talking about modes, I guess. You're actually talking about amplitude of an individual oscillator. Is that correct?
No, there are oscillation modes. The normal modes you can figure out by
Right.
just diagonalizing a matrix,
Right.
and you will see the transfer of energy between these particular modes, because in terms of the normal modes, what you will be starting with is a superposition state, not a pure state, not a
Right.
single mode
Exactly.
state.
Yeah.
And so the things will bounce around.
So in your case, are you starting with a normal mode? I mean, not a normal mode. Are you starting with one oscillator that is excited?
Yeah, I'm
and then
starting
you
with
start
one oscillator.
One oscillator excited. And what is the role of the oracle in all these things? How do you?
Oracle is a process where the oscillator is reflected. We require a phase change of pi. Now it's easiest to think about that reflection occurring not in coordinate space, but in momentum space. So if you have collision, things will just bounce off. And that reversal in velocity is a phase change of pi, that's all you need. If you can implement that in the part of the algorithm, it will do the job of oracle.
Thank you.
Sir, there was that thing where you were saying that there were these n number of things that were entangled amongst themselves in such a way as to conspire to support a particular channel of information being passed or receiving that energy. So they were all sort of aligned together. That was a phenomenon with life, or that was...
Now, first let me say that I have been talking mostly in the language of waves. And waves support coherence, but there is absolutely no entanglement. Entanglement is the most fragile part of quantum dynamics. If you take it out, the rest of the thing can survive for a long time, there is no problem. So there is no entanglement whatsoever, but there is coherence. And coherence is where you have superposition of states and you have oscillations going on for a long time, and many of these examples show that.
The particular example that you mentioned, that was what exactly, sir?
In which case, in a question of catalysis or photosynthesis, or even this one?
I think photosynthesis.
Kind of independent locations, and the job is to, whichever one will get a photon, it has to send it to the reaction center. We don't know which one will get when the sunlight falls on it, but everybody has to send it to a specific location. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I think it's that there was a mention of bacteria or something, so I'm not sure whether it's photosynthesis, it may be catalysis.
Mention of what?
It was some action upon bacteria, it was something observed within bacteria.
This is in bacteria. photosynthesis example comes from this
Yeah.
purple bacteria.
Yeah.
And it has a very specific arrangement of these molecules where they are coupled in a clever way inside this chlorophyll pigment, and they do this energy transfer.
So these wave-like quantum coherent oscillations observed within the transport lines at that temperature are a live phenomenon, sir? No.
Yes, living bacteria. If the bacteria was dead, then it would not be interested in photosynthesis.
So you had like 4, 10.5, 20 point something. For Q and N in the Grover search.
Yes.
So what about 10 or 20 do they occur in biology? Have you?
The middle answer for that.
I mean, 4 was like you said nucleotides.
Yes, there are 20 amino acids in the protein alphabet. They are distinguished from each other using a triplet genetic code. 3 base pairings are needed to uniquely identify the amino acid.
I have one brief question. The coherent oscillations that you have shown for the Br molecule, how long does it last in time? You know, the coherent oscillations that you have shown, which are about very fast ones. Yeah.
Well,
In the 2D.
as I said, the experimentally they observed it for some 600 femtoseconds
Yes.
and they stopped because they had never thought that they would see something like this.
Okay.
Okay, so they have not bothered to go further in time and see
Further.
how long it's going to go on. But at least for 600 femtoseconds, things
The
are still
oscillations.
going on.
Okay. Have they given any between any 2 states, particular states of the Br molecules? No, I mean the coherent coupling between is it B and the next state, or any idea is there? Or maybe they are.
No, I don't have the details with me, but
Okay.
what they have done is actually labeled all the molecules and their states, constructed an effective Hamiltonian, which describes the diagonal sites which represent the diagonal part which represent the binding energy, the off-diagonal elements which are coupled to amplitude transfer, and what they find is that that Hamiltonian has a what you call tridiagonal structure. So it couples from the location to its neighbor, nothing further. And so it is an example of a graph with nearest neighbor connectivity. Now if you want to propagate something on this graph from one location running around other, it will do some random walk kind of process. And the model picture which I kind of showed was built on this kind of Hamiltonian where some effect of these oscillations was seen. But there was a design question of coupling this thing with certain strengths, different molecules, and how the energy ends up in being oscillators. And that's a question of detail, and one literally has to know the 3-dimensional arrangements of this particular chlorophyll pigment to find out what is close to what and how strongly it is coupled to what, etc. It requires detailed experiments, and that has been done, but I do not have the model Hamiltonian with me right now. I mean, there are papers I can mention which has this detail. Papers the last one, this Fleming's paper is actually the good review of whatever is happening with this year described. These other papers have used the model Hamiltonian to arrive at various conclusions. They are again fairly recent ones, last month and this month.